As promised, we're going to be diving into this idea of communicating effectively, lovingly, and kindly in this week's episode. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to a new episode of the Mini Mira Show, where we talk all about spirituality, life philosophy, emotional wellness, and so much more. I'm your host, Amira Sookram, and the author of the Guilt Free Goals book and upcoming book, Feelings Based Living. So before I even dive into, step by step how to communicate effectively, I want to start by one of my biggest tips that I use to communicate with other people. And it's just working out perfectly that my voice is like very soft spoken today because when we talk about communication, we want to go in it with this energy. And part of this energy is taking emotional responsibility. So instead of blaming other people, suppressing our emotions, or even just avoiding the situation altogether, we're going into it as an active participant in sharing our needs and desires or being open to listening to somebody else's needs and desires. And so, my biggest tip that I've talked about online, and I'm going to say it again, we need to change our language from using you statements to I statements when we're communicating with other people. Using an I statement really helps you take responsibility for what's going on in the moment, and it helps for actually quite a few different things. So, when we go into communication using a lot of you statements, it kind of feels like an attack for the other person. And they're going to feel the need to retaliate towards us, usually by defending themselves or speaking out against something they don't like about us, or they're going to want to shut down and avoid it. Conflict is really hard, and a lot of people are not comfortable with conflict. And the way that we can make conflict more easygoing or more loving is to really go into it with I statements. So instead of saying something like, you never do the dishes, you could say, hey, I have noticed lately that I have been doing the dishes more, and I would really like for us to come together and maybe split the responsibilities or come together in a way that feels like we're working together. The other thing that I did there was instead of only using I statements, I also included we statements. And I like to do this, especially in like romantic relationships or at workplaces where we're actually working as a team. I think it's important to use we statements so that we feel connected to somebody else and we feel like we're not just entering this conflict or this communication by ourselves. You are a part of it too, and I want to take responsibility for my part in it, but then also come together to find a solution for we or for us together. So, what this does is it really helps us move from disconnection to connection. And it helps us move from making demands of other people to requesting something from them. So, when we go into communication to share our needs and desires, we're not demanding that this person does this. We're opening up a conversation to express our feelings, to share our needs and desires, and then trying to find a way that we can have a win win outcome from both of those things. And some of that might be accepting that your needs might not be met in this relationship and looking elsewhere to meet your needs or finding a solution where you both can feel like you're supported and loved. Or in a workplace situation, maybe not loved, but respected to have effective communication and to have an effective workday without feeling frustrated or without feeling the emotions you're feeling going into this conversation. The last thing I want to say about this is that people don't rush to help people when they feel blamed. They don't rush to help people who are making demands of them. You know, that boss who's always like micromanaging you, or even your partner who's always micromanaging you. You're going to be less likely to step up and be responsible for yourself or for meeting somebody else's needs if somebody is demanding something of you. But if somebody asks you to do something effectively, lovingly, kindly, you're going to be more willing to go into that situation and actually try to help out. So, the way that we communicate our needs and desires matters so much in how they might be met in the future and how willing somebody else is to listen to what our feelings are and respect them in that moment. All we want is for our feelings to feel validated, but also valued by other people. And we want to increase connection in our relationships. And blame, suppression, avoidance are not exactly the motives that we're going into communication with, because we want actually to connect with people. And often it's not that we are going into a communicative conversation or conflict with this idea that we want to disconnect. We actually do want to connect. And it's just that maybe we don't know the best way to do that because we weren't modeled that as children. So if you're sitting there a little bit blaming yourself or like thinking about how you could have said something in a different way, don't worry. We have all been there. Even I am there sometimes still, actually, probably a lot of times still. It takes time to unlearn the way that we are taught to enter into conflict and communication. And most likely, we saw something when we were a child and we just mimicked that, or we went in the opposite direction of that. We have time to change. We have to put in an effort for that, but we can always make those changes. And I really hope that in listening to this, you see how maybe in communicating, we can enter into it with this idea of being kind and loving and seeking out connection instead of making demands and trying to disconnect within relationships. So I really hope this was helpful. And next time you want to communicate something to somebody, take out your notes app, write out what you want to say, and then try and replace as many words where you're using you with I or we. And this does take some creativity sometimes. Sometimes there are no other ways to say it, but instead of starting with the word you can start with I feel frustrated when you aren't doing the dishes. That's the first way to start. And then the second step is doing, I feel frustrated when the dishes are not done when I come home. You see how we removed the other person from that? And it's just, I feel this way because this situation is going on, and we're not blaming the other person for the situation. And I get it. The longer into relationships, it becomes harder to not blame somebody because we've seen a pattern of behavior. And then remembering they have also seen a pattern of us communicating in a certain way. So, what happens if we change the way we communicate? I want you to think about that one this week. What happens, or what could potentially happen, if we change the way we communicate within relationships? And think about one relationship that you really would love to change the way you communicate with that person. Bring them to mind, send them some loving thoughts, or even just release some of the heavy energy there. And take a deep breath. We got this. Change takes time. And I'm very happy that somebody has finally read this book and actually enjoyed it and learned something. And they said that they learned a little bit more about me too, which I loved. That's it for this week. Please subscribe, like, share, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye.